Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. It is me and Kip Adams this week. Ben Wolk is out on the road getting some recruiting notes, and we'll pass those along, no doubt, over on the Junkyard. But we are back in a game week. Kip had a nice little bit of a break last week with Georgia having its bye week, but the Bulldogs will be back in full force on Saturday and in a very big game playing Florida in Jacksonville. Kip, did you take advantage of the bye week? Did you allow yourself a little bit of rest before we get ready for these last 5 games of the regular season?
If resting is taking advantage of the bye week, then I 100% took advantage of the bye week. My productivity level was, most would say, average on average of what it normally is, but I rested as much as I could, enjoyed a stress-free, for the most part, day of or weekend of college football, and a stress-filled filled day of NFL on Sunday, and yeah, I'm arrested as I can be for a NFC South division leading Falcons fan.
They never make it easy, and Kip, as much as anybody, they never will.
It's just a rite of passage, really. It kind of prepares us for anything. I mean, I think we are the strongest group of people in the sports world just because of that. And when people talk about pain, they have no idea. So it's prepared us, it's strengthened us, it's hardened us, and bring it on.
Yes, that is the way. And I saw fans even after that ugly game looking at the schedule, being like, "Hey, this sets up pretty well." And I'm like, "Man, it's the same thing every single year."
That is the setup.
That's where they get you. But you know what? We're gonna stick with it. And for me, very fun weekend. Obviously, we love what we do, but it is nice to get a break. Went and saw Killers of the Flower Moon. Very, very good. Would highly recommend people go watch it. Very long movie, but very, very good. Had a chance to visit some friends. That was also fun. But we're turning the focus back to football. And I know, Kip, you're as excited as I am about that. And I think this makes for a very interesting game for Georgia. Getting ready to play Florida. We had a chance to talk to Kirby Smart, Cedric Van Pran. Trying to remember who else we got yesterday. Javon Bullard as well. And getting a feel for what that bye week meant to this team. And I really think, and Kirby made this point after the Vanderbilt game, that there's never not a good time for that bye week, but it was just so well timed as far as getting guys healthy. You think about guys like Amarius Mims who have been on that rehab and been on it for a bit, and then you think about guys like Xavier Truss who gets hurt against Vanderbilt. But I thought it was really interesting. Cedric Van Pran talked about the offensive line really going back to the fundamentals during that bye week, trying to clean things up, trying to shore things up because they've had a lot thrown at them. I mean, at this point, Monroe Freeling was the third different right tackle to play this year because of those injuries, and he held up pretty well. And I think Georgia's only given up 6 sacks through 7 games, and Cedric wasn't exactly happy with that number. You could tell by him talking about it that he thought it could be better. But I do think that week was really big across the board for Georgia. These are some really big games. It's kind of funny. Coming into this season, we looked at the schedule and thought it was pretty easy on the whole. That there was a mix of games early that were really interesting. Well, now the way it's set up, I mean, it's a lot like that 2022 schedule, where those big games were toward the end of the season, end of October and into November. So I would say this bye week was huge for Georgia. Kip, what did you think of when this break came and how big it could be for the Bulldogs given what is left on their schedule this season?
Yeah, I kind of think about the running back position just with Kendall Milton and potentially Roderick Robinson coming back. I think with him, it's probably a situation where he might have some guys in front of him. I'm not sure this is kind of the week where you really want to bring him back too early, but getting Kendall Milton, back and healthy would be huge. And to your point on the offensive line, just the fact that I think, usually the last couple of years during this run, the offensive line has kind of been, mostly the same group of 5, maybe 6. You had a guy rotating in. It was Amarius Mims for the most part last season, but You look heading into this weekend, you're probably looking at two guys, starting who, began the season as starters. I mean, Cedric Van Pran at center, Tate Ratledge at right guard, brand new left tackle and Ernest Green. Now you have Dylan Fairchild in there at left guard. Maybe you have Xavier Truss. Maybe you have Amarius Mims, and maybe it's Monroe Freeling out there. It's you've had some guys that you've had to switch in and out there, and for the most part, I think this group is performed at a comparably high level to what they've been able to do the last couple of years. So I think for that group, the bye week came at a perfect time. It allows them to kind of reset, know what they have, and I honestly think, today as we record this on Tuesday, it's going to be huge because I think you'll figure out whether or not a guy like Amarius Mims is a serious, candidate to play this week. I think, this is always the big practice day for Georgia. And I think, that's when they kind of find out and they can kind of go game plan, if we're going to have him in there or not. And if they do that, that'd obviously be huge. But if not, I think this group has kind of shown they can play at a high level if they don't have Amarius out there.
And someone else who I think is that week was really big for too, and I wrote as much last week as we were going through that bye week was Lad McConkey, because to me, he's about as big as anybody on this offense given the Brock Bowers injury news. I feel like he's a guy, if you were able to kind of, they've been very smart about meticulously knowing when and when not to practice him and being smart about his usage. And, I think that week had to be very big for him because whether Ladd would acknowledge that or not, you have to think he is thinking, I have to step up. And he's the kind of guy, that's been wanting to go the entire time. And Georgia's being very smart about not pushing him to try to re aggravate that back injury. But to have him, especially coming off the Brock Bowers injury in that last game, I would have to think that bye week was really big for him. And we'll really be interested when we come out of this Florida game looking at the snap counts of several guys, but especially Ladd McConkey, just to see, does he play a little bit more than we've seen in recent weeks? And has that bye week sort of allowed him to play a little bit more?
Yeah, I think this is a huge week for pass catchers in general, obviously. Stepping up in a big game in Jacksonville where that Brock Bowers wants to be out there on the field. He's had a big impact in that game. And I think this is definitely an opportunity for Ladd McConkey, but also, your guys from the transfer portal, Dominic Lovett and Ra Thomas, they've continued to get more reps and get more comfortable in this offense. And I still think even with Brock not being able to be out there, you might be able to see just a more evolved version of this offense under Mike Bobo. And Carson Beck, who now is one of the top 10 passers in the country, seems to be getting more and more comfortable each week there in the pocket. So I think this passing attack hasn't seen its ceiling, and even with the best player on the team not in the field, I think they still have a chance to really improve as far as their explosive plays.
So the thing that everybody wants to know is the injury situation with Georgia. And I'll add this caveat that we're talking on Tuesday afternoon. Kirby will probably give us a little more intel after practice on Tuesday. He was asked on Monday about Xavier Truss and Amarius Mims, said that Monday's practice, which was happening after the media session, would tell him a lot more about their availability. It doesn't sound like Xavier Truss was too banged up, especially compared to the same ankle injury that Brock Bowers had. So we'll know more about him. Kendall Milton, it sounds like he'll be good to go just based on what Kirby had to say, and we'll probably get a more of a feel from that. Sounds like Roderick Robinson is progressing as well. I would think that, especially between the two running backs, I think Kendall Milton's a little bit more likely, but we might see Roderick Robinson back as well. Kirby was asked, of course, about Brock Bowers. Wouldn't really get into how his recovery is going so far. Really wanted to focus it on the team. We'll be interested. I'm going to try to check in with Kirby in the next couple of days if he will travel. I would not be surprised if Brock makes that trip to Jacksonville, just given what he means to this team. But obviously, he's not going to play in this game, and he's going to be someone we're going to be watching over this next month just to see if we do get any updates with him and just how soon he could be back for the Bulldogs.
Yeah, I think today's kind of the day where you kind of figure out who you're going to have. And for Georgia, I mean, there's no excuses right now. I think you've built the depth in this team, and they rotate their guys for a reason. And I think you're going to have an opportunity to see a lot of guys step up in Jacksonville. But they are. I mean, there are guys that are getting healthier out there, and I think it's good news for Georgia. Whoever is able to return this week, but I mean, we're at the time of the year where you're just never going to be healthy overall as a roster. I mean, that kind of ended in fall camp, and so if any team is kind of built with the depth to overcome something like that, it's Georgia. So this is the that time of the year where we knew that they would be tested more than I guess any other stretch of the schedule, and this is kind of where they kind of write their narrative.
Take a quick break, come back, and talk a little bit about this Florida matchup and what we expect to see in Jacksonville on Saturday. Welcome back, everybody. Well, yeah, Kip, let's turn our attention to this Florida matchup. It's sort of funny to me thinking about Florida, and I'll be honest, I haven't watched them a ton this season. Watched a good bit of that Utah game, which was obviously during the week before that first, full Saturday. So I had a chance to really watch them. Saw a little bit of the Tennessee game. Went back and watched extended highlights of the South Carolina game, but I'll be honest, Kip, and I'll be interested in your take. This Florida team does look better than I thought they would be at this time of year. I was, me, and Ben Wolk had a text thread going during that Utah game, and it was like, everything's on fire. Ben, it's a real shame, Kip, that Ben is not here to sing the praises of Graham Mertz. I think if you just hold your ear out, you may be able to hear him wherever he is right now. But I will give Florida a lot of credit. I think that they have come a significant way in over the course of this season, because I thought it could get real ugly real quick. They didn't do themselves a whole lot of favors in that South Carolina game. They were down 10 with about 5 minutes to go, but good teams find ways to win, and I give Florida a lot of credit. What do you make of this Florida team going into this game, and maybe what we'll be able to see from the Gators on Saturday?
Yeah, the one thing I'll say about Graham Mertz is that he's got the nation's third highest completion percentage. It's 76.2%. And you look at how these two teams kind of mismatch up statistically. That's the one area where Florida is better than Georgia. But it's two teams that are outstanding in that area. Florida's number one in the country in completion percentage, and Georgia's number 5 overall and number 2 in the SEC at 72.5%. So, I mean, these teams are efficient at throwing the football. So right there, that it's going to be a test for both secondaries. They're going to have to play assignment football and not have blown coverages. That's going to be a key in this game. But you kind of look at Florida and where they might struggle. I think third down defense is right where you can kind of point to where there might be an area for Georgia to kind of win some battles. Georgia's number 2 in the country in third down conversion, 57.1%. It's actually much higher than it's ever been at any point. Really under Kirby Smart, the highest they've ever ended a season is like 51%. So that's an area where if you're kind of looking at this year's team and saying, well, they're not last year's team and they're not the 21 team either, but there are areas where they're actually getting better at. And third down conversion is one of them. Florida is one of the worst in the country as far as, third down conversion. They're number 108 overall in the country. And so, yeah, that's an area where Georgia can get off the field on defense and can extend some drives. I think they could, have some success in that area and kind of maybe put some distance between them and Florida. But I think this is a really interesting game just because like I said, both these offenses are efficient, passing the football and making good decisions. I will give credit to Graham Mertz. He has made really good decisions with the football for the most part this season. Outside of that Utah game, he's been exactly what they needed him to be. And it's really interesting because these teams are really strong as far as time of possession for that matter. Georgia's number 6 overall in the country, over 33 and a half minutes of possession per game, number 2 in the SEC, and Florida's number 4 overall, number 1 in the SEC in time of possession. So I think possessions, might be hard to come by in this game. You're going to have to make each one count. So in the end, the cliche is turnover battle. That could very well be true in this game because you might not get more than 3 possessions a half.
Yeah, it may kind of feel like we're watching Service Academy football if they play the way they want to play and if they hold on to the football. One point I wanted to make on Mertz that you hit on, Kip. Very impressed, looking at that South Carolina game. Very collected, very calm in the pocket. And there were some plays I wrote about this in some notes that I put on the Junkyard that their last 2 drives they had like a 4th and 10, a 4th and 1, and a 4th and 11. And they converted all of them. And one of them, he had to roll out to his right and kind of keep the play alive. A lot of credit to him there. Some notes that I think could really come in and factor in for Georgia. I thought South Carolina really attacked Florida downfield, specifically with their bigger receivers. I know Xavier Leggett really had a very big game, made some plays. I put this on the board, but I'm looking for guys like Ra Thomas and Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint to really challenge Florida's secondary because, there were several plays where South Carolina just out-physicaled Florida. Fighting for the football and just, through sheer will, just, out-physicaled the guy and caught the ball and made some big plays. So I want to see if Georgia takes advantage of that with their outside receivers and really makes Florida try to stop them. Another piece of this that I think, it's very easy to come into this game talking about the quarterbacks with Graham Mertz and Carson Beck, who's going back to his hometown. And I'll be really interested to see how he does and what he has to say about that experience. But I think the run games of both teams are going to be really big. I was really impressed watching Montrell Johnson and also Trevor Etienne, but really Johnson in the fourth quarter of that South Carolina game looked really, really impressive. And I think that this is an opportunity for Daijun Edwards and the other running backs for Georgia because we've seen Florida struggle against a run. South Carolina, which is a team that has not run the ball very well this year, they broke off some really impressive runs with their running backs in that game. And then you go back to the only other game to this point that Florida has lost besides that Utah game, that Kentucky game. Ray Davis just made short work of Florida's defense. And I think they rushed for over 300 yards, just a very impressive performance. So to me, I really am going to be paying attention to the run games of both teams because I think when you look at Florida, I think you immediately think of ETN, but Montrell Johnson's really impressive himself. And Javon Bullard talked about that a little bit on Monday. But on the other side, I think Georgia's got a really good opportunity to run the football, to really enforce their will on Florida. And we'll just have to see if they're able to do it.
Yeah, you just looked at last year's game. Daijun Edwards in that game, 12 carries for 106 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was one of the most impressive players in that game, if not the most impressive, even with, Kenny McIntosh also having a pair of touchdowns in that game. So, you saw Georgia have some success against them on the ground last year. I don't think that there's any reason to go away from that because, like you said, Carson Beck playing in Jacksonville, you want to make sure you put him in a situation where he's able to be poised and collected. A strong run game. You can't, that's the best thing you can give a quarterback. So I think that's going to be a huge focus. And really, it's got to be a call to action to this offensive line. They have to establish, some strong running lanes for Daijun and the rest of Georgia's backs to be able to, see some daylight and not have to make plays out of the backfield, make multiple guys miss. So I think that's going to be huge for Georgia. And I know that, Etienne had some success against Georgia's defense last year. And, Kirby Sparks probably hitting home with that. This guy, ran for 73 and a touchdown on us last year. And, he's just probably chomping at the bit to try to, break 100 yards this year. And, it's really going to be up to this group of linebackers to play strong assignment football and not let him get extra yards and to not, miss any tackles. Because I think broken tackles are going to be a huge aspect of this game for Georgia's defense.
Definitely. Want to make sure and plug that on Wednesday afternoon at 4:30 Eastern, Graham Hall from Swamp 24/7 will be on. We are going to do a podcast really getting into the details of both teams and really previewing this year's game. So I would encourage people to keep an eye out and watch for that. Georgia men's basketball minute. There's a lot of excitement right now around Georgia recruiting. No commits to date, but everybody's really watching. A lot of excitement about some big names for Georgia: Asa Newell, Darian Reed, Kenai Ruths. There is some buzz about Georgia's chances with all three of those guys. Right now, it's just sort of a wait and see mode. It was pretty good timing on Monday afternoon. We talked to Mike White. Very last question someone asked about the 2024 class, and Mike White just smiles real big and says, "Who are we getting?" And that was all he said. So we're watching. I'll give credit to On3. Darian Reed may be announcing his commitment somewhere this weekend. Alabama seems like the biggest threat to Georgia. Asa Newell, we really don't have a timetable yet on him. I think Georgia feels really good about him. So there's a lot of excitement right now. It's a lot of wait and see to see how this class shapes up. But Georgia, you can kind of see the future pieces that are lined up at this point with those guys potentially coming to Georgia. Even if it's just one of those guys would be a big win. If you get multiple, obviously a huge, huge boost. And Georgia really likes Silas Demery and Blue Kane, the two guards that they've got. You can see the pieces. So it's going to be up to Mike White and Eric Pastrana to close on this 2024 class. But like I said, there's a lot of excitement, and I think there's a whole lot of people anxiously waiting and wanting to see what happens with these recruitments. But I think there's reason for excitement when it comes to Georgia.
Yeah, you get Asa Newell on board, and then maybe that swings the pendulum for Roofs, and you're able to get a pair of top 30 forwards. I think that would be huge for Georgia basketball. As we kind of look for them to make a splash in year 2 and make a tournament. I think that would be huge momentum for this program. But you get two guys like that on board, you can build an offense around a couple of forwards like that, especially guys that have kind of a modern game like these two.
Definitely. And we'll have to see if one of these guys commits. Could very well sort of be a Pied Piper situation, like you see in football with a quarterback that guys follow. So we will be all over that. And I would be sure to encourage folks to keep an eye out these next few days. We will be all over that. We are going to wrap up the episode right there. Appreciate everyone for watching this live. Everyone who tuned in after the fact is listening to this after the fact. Again, I want to make sure and remind people that Wednesday at 4:30, we will have the podcast with Graham Hall from Swamp 24/7. Have a chance to really dive deep into this matchup and get a feel for what's coming. Be sure to subscribe to dogs247.com. Also go to the Dogs 24/7 YouTube. You've got Kirby Smart press conferences, player interviews, all of these podcasts, a whole lot of good stuff. And I got to plug Mike White and the men's basketball team got interviews on there from there as well. So for Kip Adams, I am Jordan Hill. We're going to get out of here right there. Until next time, take care.